Shalom and welcome to the Fan's Perspective. My name is Eliana Piepsh. I'm a former IDF combat commander and a diehard Commanders fan, and today we are going to be breaking down a few different scenarios for Washington in the first round in this year's NFL draft. So we'll be talking about if Washington trades back, how far should we be willing to trade back? If we do trade back, what players should we be targeting at that position? And if Washington stays at 7, what players should we be hoping to get? And what scenarios could happen and fall out ahead of us in the first 6 picks in this draft? Now, we'll also be breaking down Dexter Lawrence's trade from the Giants to Cincinnati in exchange for the 10th overall pick and what fallout that has for the draft as a whole, and especially for Washington. Because now the Giants are probably going to have 2 impact players. Maybe that changes who they target at pick 5, which would then affect who Washington could take at pick 7. There's a lot of things to break down. We are 5 days away from the NFL draft. If this last week has proven anything, it is that it's going to be a crazy draft. We already had top 10 draft trades and draft picks going and exchanging hands. This is going to be so exciting. I'm so excited for this draft. It might not be the highest quality of draft that we've ever seen, but we're all here for the shenanigans and the craziness that happens. So let's just jump right into it. We're going to be using the PFF mock draft simulator. And if you are interested in mock drafts, I did a mock draft of what I would do last week on the channel. Feel free to check that out. I will say that at that time, the Bengals had the 10th overall pick, so that'll change a little bit. I will be doing a predictive mock draft the day of the draft, so feel free to tune in then. But this is just, I love this so much. This is so exciting. All right, so here we are. We're just going to do a full first-round mock draft, but it's not really a full first-round mock draft. I will be going through possible trade-back scenarios, and we'll be focusing on the Giants, what they could do at 5 and 10, and how that affects Washington. So let's start us off without further ado. All right, starting the draft. Let's be honest, the Raiders are going to take Fernando Mendoza. We all know that. Now, with the Jets, as of a week ago, all of the NFL analysts have kind of pivoted to David Bailey going to the New York Jets. Since then, the Jets canceled a top 30 workout with David Bailey. Now, that could mean many things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are not going to draft him at 30. It could be that they know that they are going to draft him, and they'd rather use one of their limited 30 visits on another player later in the rounds. It could be that they've decided they don't want David Bailey, and that they're going to pivot to Arvell Reese, most probably. So, we don't know exactly what that means, but it does give a lot of intrigue. Maybe this is just them trying to get the NFL world to focus more attention on David Bailey, to maybe entice a team like Dallas to trade all the way up with them, so they can get a bigger draft haul if they don't love either player at number 2. There's a lot of options and a lot of scenarios that could happen, but I'm going to do one scenario with Bailey, one scenario with Reese. I think Bailey's going to go to the Jets. I still think so. Even though the Jets are multiple years away, and I think Reese is a perfect player in that case, because he's a very raw prospect. He's big, he's fast, he's strong, he has the tools to be a great edge rusher, but the question is, can he fulfill that potential? He only had less than 100 pass rushing snaps this past year, so it's very much a projection. That makes more sense for a Jets team that knows that they're a few years away, that has 2 first-round picks in this year's class, and 3 first-round picks in next year's class, that Arvell Reese would be a pretty good fit for a team that is building for the future and hoping that he can develop in the next couple years and become that extremely high ceiling player that he can be. Versus a David Bailey, who is a very good prospect, had 14.5 sacks. I personally am a little bit lower on him. I still think he's a good prospect and a first round caliber prospect. I would target him more in the mid-teens, early 20s range, but that's my personal opinion. The Jets obviously seem to be more comfortable and more confident in him. And he's obviously extremely productive, and he can help you more day one. And for Aaron Glenn, who's probably on the hot seat, the head coach of the Jets, it's probably a little bit more enticing. So it's probably going to be a fight between the head coach and the GM. We'll see who wins that battle. Now, with the Cardinals, I don't think they're going to take Jeremiah Love. I think they honestly should. So the question is, do they take Arvell Reese, the next best player? Do they take Francis Mauigoa? Do they go something a little bit more out of the box, go Sonny Styles because he's just this athletic freak? I'm going to go with Arvell Reese here. I think they'll take Arvell Reese with this slot. Now, if I'm the Titans, I'm assuming that they would take Sonny Styles at this point or Jeremiah Love. I'm going to give them the Sonny Styles in this scenario. Because now here we are, the Giants. And they have pick 5. So do they go Love? Do they go Downs? I don't see them taking a receiver. Some people had thought that maybe the Giants would take a receiver with the 5th overall pick. I don't see that happening now because they have the 10th overall pick. And with their 10th overall pick, they could easily pick a receiver. They flew out for Jordan Tyson's pro day workout that happened this past Friday because he was injured, still recovering from an injury during the combine and the Arizona State pro day, so he worked out a little bit later. Joe Schoen flew out for that, so there's a very, very distinct possibility that they take a receiver at 10. It could be Jordan Tyson, it could be Makai Lemon, maybe Carnell Tate makes it there. So I would assume that they would take receiver at 10 and not at 5, because you're not going to be able to get Jeremiah Love probably at 10. You're not going to be able to get, I'm hoping not, Caleb Downs. I would absolutely love Caleb Downs. I think Washington would and should jump all over that. So if this is how the board falls and you're the Giants, I think it's between two players for them, and that is Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Love. If you take Caleb Downs, some people could say a reach. He's a safety who has average athletic skills, high, weight, speed, all of that. So would you take that player with the 5th overall pick? They would probably love to get Sonny Styles. Now I'm pretty sure that they would take Sonny Styles with their 5th overall pick. And then with 10, they would take receiver, let's say. But do you take running back and just go on the offensive side of the ball? Do you go running back, but then do you really need receiver at 10? Maybe then they would take their offensive lineman, which most people think that the offensive linemen aren't quite worth a top 5 pick in this draft, maybe more in the double-digit range. So maybe they would do that. They would get, Jeremiah Love. They now don't need a pass catcher or a offensive weapon for Jackson Dart. They can now invest in the offensive line at 10. Maybe they take a corner at 10 and they take an offensive player at 5. Let's say for the sake of argument that the Titans take Jeremiah Love. Now at this scenario, I think the Giants would just run in the card and get Sonny Styles. And if they do get Sonny Styles at this point, do the Browns take Francis Mauigoa? Now all of the offensive linemen are available. Do you take Francis Mauigoa? Maybe they like Spencer Fano more. Do they take Carnell Tate? Do they trade back? So there's been talk that Dallas is going to want to trade up for Sonny Styles, and maybe they would do that with the Browns at pick 6 because he's probably not getting past Washington at 7, which I think makes sense. But now with the Giants having the 10th overall pick, I think if Sonny Styles is available for the Giants at 5, I do not think that they pass up on him, even for a Jeremiah Love. I think with both safety and linebacker having less positional value, I would assume that they would go with the crazy freak who has maybe the higher ceiling, and that is Sonny Styles over Caleb Downs. I think their dream scenario, honestly, is probably Caleb Downs at 10 with Sonny Styles at 5, hoping that Cleveland, let's say, takes Francis Mauigoa, and then Washington takes Carnell Tate, right? Because you already have Jeremiah Love off the board. So in this scenario, in the Giants, I think dream scenario, Washington would take Carnell Tate. That's basically my nightmare scenario. And then they would have the Saints taking Mansour Delane, let's say, which could very much happen. I personally like Jermon McCoy more, but Jermon McCoy is more of a man coverage corner, where Mansour Delane can do a little bit of both, so you can be a little bit more flexible in your alignment. And then at this point, you're the Chiefs. You could take Caleb Downs, but also have Ruben Bain, who's of higher positional value. This is a Chiefs team that is paying Patrick Mahomes, obviously, a boatload of money, and that is probably more important for a team like them than it is for a Washington or a New York that has quarterbacks on rookie deals. So they do need to be much more aware of that. They're paying a lot of players top-level contracts, and I think that they will need to use the draft in order to kind of subsidize that to keep them under the cap. So they might take Ruben Bain. He is one of the top prospects in this draft. He had some off-the-field concerns that have come up over the last week or so, but NFL teams have known that for well over a year, so I don't think this is going to necessarily mess with his draft position too much. And then if you're the Giants, you get Caleb Downs here, and your haul is Sonny Styles and Caleb Downs. I think that is the absolute dream for New York. And did you get a receiver? No, but that's not the end of the world. You can get an offensive lineman later. You can get a receiver later. There is no interior defensive lineman that is worth a top 10 pick, so they weren't going to get one either to replace Dexter Lawrence. And I think this is probably the dream scenario for New York and like the doomsday scenario for Washington, because I would not want Carnell Tate at 6 at all. If this was to be the board, if we go back to Washington here at the 7th pick, it would be between Ruben Bain and Caleb Downs. I personally would lean towards Caleb Downs. I absolutely love him as a player. I think he's a plug and play pro. He's going to help us on the back end. Washington has 2 of our current 3 safeties are going to be free agents next year. You put in Caleb Downs, and let's say you have Quan Martin play the slot a little bit more, and Nick Cross will probably play a bit more strong safety. You can move Caleb Downs around. He can play all over the field. He's an extremely versatile player. And Will Harris can be more, you could say, a coverage player. He's a little bit bigger, so maybe he can play a little bit better lined up against tight ends. So you have each player kind of has their role and what they're stronger at and what they're maybe a little bit weaker at. That's probably what I would want for Washington at this point in the draft. All right, now let's do another scenario. Let's go and let's talk about a trade that could happen. Now let's go with the Jets. Let's say the Jets take David Bailey. I'm still sticking with, I think the David Bailey smoke is there. The Cardinals, let's say, do a surprise and they get Jeremiah Love. They're going to get the best player on the board, try and tank for next year, and that would be their thought process at this point, in this scenario. Now you have the Titans, and then at this point, do you go Arvell Reese or do you go Sonny Styles? I would assume that they would go Arvell Reese with Robert Saleh and him being able to find a role for him. The Giants are going to go with Sonny Styles again. I think Sonny Styles is probably their dream scenario at number 5. And let's say the Browns get Francis Mauigoa. Now, this is a similar position than we were this last draft scenario that I did. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Washington picks up the phone. Let's just say Washington absolutely loves Sonny Styles, and that's who Washington wanted to take. And because he goes to the Giants at 5, Washington is now willing to move down. Let's say the Jets called Washington, and I know this scenario has been brought up by a lot of draft analysts, but it makes sense at this point in time, because if you look at who is next on the clock, right, you have Washington at 7. You have the Saints after Washington. The Saints could easily be targeting a receiver. The Chiefs, same thing. They have not given Patrick Mahomes sufficient weapons over the last few years. They're now at a point in the draft where they can get a true difference maker. I wouldn't be surprised if they take a receiver. The Giants have been sniffing all over receivers this whole draft, so maybe they take a receiver. The Dolphins might, Dallas probably doesn't, but that's 3 teams, probably 4 teams in a row that want a receiver. So if you're the Jets at 16, you're probably stressing, thinking that one of your receivers isn't going to be there, and you want to draft a receiver, first of all, because it's a high position of value, and secondly, because you're going to be targeting your quarterback in next year's class, and you want to have Garrett Wilson plus probably a 1B in your mind, and then that way your rookie quarterback can have a soft landing into the NFL. So if you're the Jets, you're probably going to be offering Washington, let's say 16, probably 44, 33 might be a little rich, for Washington at 7. I think honestly they would have to give a little bit more. It would either be 44 and maybe 103, their 4th round pick, which is top of the 4th, or would they give just 33? I would assume Washington would want more picks, so they would take 44 and 103. They offer this trade. It is accepted. And now the Jets are on the clock with the 7th overall pick. Now, who would they take in this scenario? Which of the receivers? I'm going to assume that they're going to want Carnell Tate, more of a bigger body, also Ohio State connection with Garrett Wilson. Mekhi Lemon is a good player, but he's more of a slot. I don't know if you trade up for him to the 7th overall pick to select a player of that caliber. Where Jordan Tyson has an extremely, extremely high ceiling, probably the highest ceiling of any of these top 3 receivers. But the negative with him is the injury concerns. So I would say they would probably go with the safer pick in Carnell Tate. Now they take Carnell Tate. Saints are on the clock. They could still take a receiver if they want. Ruben Bain is available. Downs, Delane. I'm going to give them Mansour Delane in this scenario. The Chiefs, guys, I think they're going to want Ruben Bain. I just think they're going to want Ruben Bain, maybe Caleb Downs. Let's give them Caleb Downs. I gave them Ruben Bain last time. Now, if you're the Giants, who do you take? Do you take one of the receivers? Maybe you do take Thieneman. Do you take Fano to really improve that offensive line? I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. The receivers on the board, Lemon, Tyson. Who would they take in this scenario? I'm going to assume that if they've done all this homework at the receivers, it's probably because they knew that they were going to be able to get a secondary pick in the 1st round and not a top 5 pick. So I'm going to assume that they are going to be sticking with receiver, and I will give them Jordan Tyson. You have 2 big outside receivers. Yes, they lost Wan'Dale Robinson, and Mekhi Lemon would probably be a really good replacement for him, but I don't think you use the 10th overall pick to replace a player of Wan'Dale Robinson's caliber. If they really loved Wan'Dale Robinson, they just would have extended him. So I'm going to give them Jordan Tyson, an outside, really high ceiling level player. Now you're Miami at 11. I think you just take best player on the board, and that's Ruben Bain. You just move on. They've moved on from a lot of pass rushers. They traded Jalen Phillips to the Eagles over the season. They cut Bradley Chubb. They still have Chop Robinson, but I think you add another pass rusher. And also, he's basically the polar opposite of Chop Robinson. Chop Robinson is this kind of lightweight, short arm speed pass rusher. Ruben Bain is also short arms, but a stout, physical, strength, bull rush, more based pass rusher. Now you're Dallas, you're going defense. The best defensive player on the board is between Thieneman and McCoy. I really don't know who they would take in this scenario. I've heard that they are a little bit more skeptical of Jermon McCoy's health, so I'm going to give them Thieneman. Now, with the 13th pick, we have the Rams. Do they go Mekhi Lemon? Do they maybe go Spencer Fano and improve the offensive line? I'm just going to go quickly. I'm going to say Mekhi Lemon. Devontae Adams is probably not going to stick around next year. Puka Nakua's had some off-the-field question marks. I don't know how confident they're going to feel with giving him a big money deal. So we're going to go with Mekhi Lemon to the Rams. Now, the Ravens, I'm just going to go with the chalk pick of Ioane, top guard in this class, one of the top players in this class, and it's exactly the type of player who Baltimore needs, especially with Tyler Linderbaum moving on to Vegas. Now we have Tampa Bay at pick 15. Sadiq or McCoy is probably who I'm leaning towards. I'm going to give them McCoy. I think he's just such a great player. I think he's the number one corner in this class. I think he had the best tape of anyone in any year of this whole class in his 2024 tape. He's recovering from a torn ACL. He was able to run his pro day. He did run a 4.3, but his change of direction field workout was not quite as good as you would expect for someone to be, 16 months removed from a torn ACL. Now you're Washington. The top players on the board are offensive linemen, not what Washington needs. Kenyan Sadiq, honestly, Washington does not need a tight end. CJ Allen, he's a good linebacker. I don't think he's that good. So does Washington take an older edge rusher? I do not think so. This is Washington, who was one of the oldest teams in the league last year. You have Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, who's a very good safety, turnover machine. Do you take Kendrick Falk, this kind of high upside edge? Would you take Omar Cooper Jr.? So there are options. You take Caden McDonald, interior defensive lineman. Deron Payne's going to be a free agent next year. Javon Kinlaw did not have a great first year, and you can easily move on from him after the second year. Johnny Newton is going into his third year in what is a pivotal year for the second-round draft pick. Do you take Denzel Boston? This is probably a little bit farther than I would want Washington to trade back towards. I would probably want Washington to trade back no farther than 13 is probably what I would want. In this scenario, I might take Omar Cooper Jr. Probably between Omar Cooper Jr., Kendrick Falk, and Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I think Omar Cooper Jr. has just a really high floor. I think he's going to be a really solid pro. Kendrick Falk is way too much of a question mark. He would be going into a very good scenario for Washington with a team that is basically 5 deep at the edge rush, and only one of them is under contract after this year, so you can kind of let him learn a little bit, learn some technique, learn kind of how to be a pro in the NFL, and then hopefully he can take over and be your number 2 edge. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, as I said, safety is a need for Washington. I don't think it's a huge need, and I don't think he's quite the player that it is worth to take a safety at 16, where Caleb Downs, I think, inarguably is, and I would absolutely love to get him at 7, but that's just not how it worked. So I'm going to go Omar Cooper Jr. for Washington. So this is one of the scenarios. I think 16 is a little bit further back, and if you do go back to 16, you're going to have to be prepared to basically just take a receiver. Now we're going to do a situation where Washington would trade down, maybe not quite as far, maybe in the early teens. So Fernando Mendoza is going number 1 overall to Vegas. That's going to happen. In this situation, let's say the Jets take Arvell Reese. Arizona, I'm going to give them Jeremiah Love. And now you have the Titans. The Titans have David Bailey, Sonny Styles. That'd probably be their top 2. Maybe they go Francis Mauigoa. If they want to, maybe their offensive line isn't great. They can upgrade it. They have a rookie quarterback. Protecting that rookie quarterback is of utmost importance. Okay, so in this scenario, Dallas is going to want Tennessee's 4th overall pick. Tennessee's going to want 12 and 20 probably back in return because Dallas does not have another pick until number 92. So I think they're going to want both firsts. And if not, they're probably going to want 2027 draft capital, and I don't know if Dallas is going to be willing to give that up when they don't have a first-round pick next year. So I'm going to say they give up both first-round picks this year, and Tennessee will have to trade away 4 and 35, but they also get Dallas's 177. Let's do that. Offer trade. Trade accepted. All right. So now Dallas has the 4th overall pick. The talk on the block is that they love David Bailey, so they trade up to get David Bailey. Now you are the Giants. Probably fell pretty well, with the exception that Jeremiah Love isn't an option for you. They got Sonny Styles, you got Caleb Downs, maybe Mansour Delane, you got any receiver you want. I'm going to give them, in this scenario, Caleb Downs. Now, the Browns are on the clock. I will give them Francis Mauigoa. No, I'll give them Spencer Fano. I honestly like Spencer Fano a little bit more. I'm going to give them Spencer Fano. Now, Washington has Sonny Styles, Ruben Bain, and all of the receivers on the clock. And now let's see who would possibly want to trade with Washington. Let's say the Rams want to trade with Washington. They will give Washington the 13th overall pick and 61 for 7. I think that's pretty fair, and let us accept that trade. LA is on the board. Do they take Sonny Styles? They have Landman, who's a great linebacker, but you could really step up your defense to another level if you take Sonny Styles. Ruben Bain, you probably don't need similar player or similar style player to Jared Verse. They also are just a stacked team. I'm going to give them a receiver. Let's say in this round that they love Carnell Tate. They take Carnell Tate with the 7th overall pick. Now at 8, with New Orleans, let's try and change things up a little. So they do not take Mansour Delane. They take Jordan Tyson, wide receiver, Arizona State. Now, Kansas City's on the clock. Would they take Ruben or would they take Sonny? I think they take Ruben. I think just the positional value is too important for them. They take Ruben Bain in this scenario. The Giants are on cloud friggin' 9. Sonny Styles is still there. They draft Sonny Styles. Eliana's depressed as heck. The Dolphins, they could take the corner. They could take an offensive lineman, Thieneman. I'm going to give them Mansour Delane. They need cornerback help. Storm Duck cannot be your starter for like multiple years. Just guys, no. This can't be happening. I understand the receiver is this gigantic hole, but 2 receivers are already taken. Go and take the top corner on the board. You're now Tennessee. I think you take an offensive lineman at this scenario. Maybe take Makai Lemon. I don't think so. Would you take Iowane or would you take Mami Noah? I'm going to give them Mami Noah at pick 12. Now you're Washington at 13. And I think this kind of illustrates why 16 is a little bit too far back for Washington, where 13 is kind of the end of the acceptable range. You have Dylan Thieneman, who I really like at safety. I think if you put him, you draft him, and he's more of your free safety. He's roaming back there in the secondary, kind of fixing any sins that your corners are inevitably going to make. And then you have Nick Ross as your strong safety, closer to the line of scrimmage. He's one of the best run-defending safeties in the NFL of the last few years. Quan Martin, as I said before, maybe he plays a little bit more slot when needed. Will Harris is more of a coverage player. And you have, everyone has their role in this coming year. And then next year, let's say we let them both walk in Will Harris and Quan Martin. And now you have your 2 starting safeties, Dylan Thieneman, Nick Ross. And I think that's a great position to be if you're Washington. You could do that. I don't think Kenyan Sadiq is a need for Washington. You might just go Iowane because he's just such a good player. He might be the best player on the board at this point. Jamon McCoy, I absolutely love. Makai Lemon is there. I think Iowane, you probably don't go there because I think there's still 3 very high caliber players in Dylan Thieneman, Makai Lemon, and Jermon McCoy. I think Jermon McCoy is probably the position of biggest need for Washington. I think he comes in day 1 and really helps solidify that team. Makai Lemon can very much help Washington. They have Terry McLaurin. He now steps in to be your slot, and you have one of Burks or Luke McCaffrey or De'Ami Brown be your second outside receiver, and now you have a much, much more complete receiving room. Or you can go Thieneman, as I said before. I'm going to go Jermon McCoy. I absolutely love him as a player, and now that is who Washington takes with the 13th overall pick. All right, now let's do a different mock scenario for Washington. We're going to give Washington another option to trade back. Yeah, so Mendoza goes number 1. Let's take David Bailey. 2 to the Jets. We'll go with an offensive lineman here. Francis Maui Noah. 3 to the Cardinals. Now with 4, we'll give Tennessee, Jeremiah Love for kicks and giggles. Why not? 5 for the Giants. Here I'm going to make a surprise pick. I'm going to give them Spencer Fano. Let's say that they decided they're just going to go full offense. We have Jackson Dart. We need to make sure we have a good enough offense around him. We're going to get the tackle at number 5 overall, and we are very confident, let's say, in all 3 of the top receivers. We're very confident that one of them is going to get to us if I'm the Giants at number 10, and we're just going to solidify that offense. We now have a very good offensive line. We're a pretty good offensive line. We now have, rookie receiver X, Malik Neighbors. We got Cam Scadaboo. Jackson Dart now has all the tools he needs to succeed in the league. So if you're the Browns, there's no offensive lineman worth it. You're just going to go and take Carnell Tate. They have to get an offensive lineman and a receiver, presumably in the first round of the draft. So 2 offensive linemen are taken. They take Carnell Tate. Now you're Washington in the absolute dream scenario. Look at all these 5. Look at these 5 guys. Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Ruben Bain, Caleb Downs, and Mansour Delane. Washington is living on cloud 9. We would love any of these 5 guys in the first round. So, in other words, Washington can trade up anywhere to 11 and be happy. Let's say the Chiefs are like, guys, we need an Arvell Reese. This is probably a win-win for Washington. We trade down 2 spots and we get, let's say, 109. Their 4th round pick. Washington doesn't have a 4th round pick. That's probably all it would take to go down 2 spots. That's what I'm thinking. And let's do it. Now with the 7th pick, Kansas City takes Arvell Reese. The Saints could get Styles, could get Bain. Let's say they get Bain in this scenario. Washington's still on cloud 9. I think if it's down between Downs and Styles, they would take Styles. So I'm giving Washington Styles in this position. And sadly, the Giants could take Caleb Downs. That's probably really enticing for them. But if they're going to stick with what I said was probably their mindset in that scenario, if they were to take an offensive lineman, I will give them Jordan Tyson. So this is another option for what Washington could do. I don't think Washington should try and trade back farther than LA at 13. I think once you do that, it brings up too many question marks. Now here's the PFF big board. Some of this I agree with, some of this I don't. At 7 for Washington, there are 4 players who I would absolutely love to get. And that is Arvell Reese. Here at 2, it's Sonny Styles, Ruben Bain, and Caleb Downs. Those are the 4 players who I would absolutely love. 2 edge rushers, 1 linebacker, 1 safety. Now, other players who I could accept taking at number 7, even though I won't be the most happy, and that's Mansour Delane or Jermon McCoy, and honestly, Jeremiah Love, depending how the board falls. Now let's dive into the players who I would be absolutely elated to get at 7. This is in no particular order, I'm just kind of writing down names. Alright, I put him at 1, but I'm just throwing in names. Sonny Styles, let's say I rank him at 2. Let's go with Downs. He is number 3. Now Ruben Bain at 4. These would be the 4 players who I would absolutely love to get at the 7th overall pick. The other players who I would be fine with getting would probably mean that we are picking one of these players above one of these 4 that you see next to you, but I would accept it and I would understand the thought behind that. And that is Jeremiah. The next would be the corners, so Mansour Delane. And last but not least, Jermon McCoy. Now, these would be the other players who I'd be willing to take at 7. My heart wouldn't be broken. I probably would rather one of these 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4 would probably be the guys who I would rather more, but not the end of the world. I can live to fight another day. Now, if we were to trade back to, let's say, the early teens, right? 11, 13, something like that, because we're not trading back with Dallas. It ain't not happening. Now, new players would then be added to my board of players who I would really want to have. And that is Dylan Thieneman. At this point in time, I'd be okay with Tate if we got him at like 13. I think the top 10 height is crazy. I think in general, he's a top 15 to 25 player in a normal draft. I understand this draft is maybe not as strong. Receiver is a need for Washington, so I'd be willing to reach 3 picks or so and pick him at 11 or pick him at 13, something like that. So Carnell Tate in this scenario would be added. I would take Lemon for sure. Lemon I would accept in that range. I would accept Tyson if Washington is confident in his medicals. I would just kind of defer to the team. If they're confident in his medicals, then I'm confident that he can be a number 2 and maybe can grow to be the number 1 in the future for Washington. Honestly, Omar Cooper Jr., top 13 is a little rich. If Washington was stocked a little bit later in the draft, let's say we traded back with the Jets or someone, or Minnesota just wanted Jeremiah Love. Let's say Jeremiah Love was available at 7. Minnesota was willing to just sell the farm for him and be traded back to 18, and Omar Cooper Jr. was there. I'd be willing to take him, but probably not in that really early teen range. At this point in time, I probably would be willing to take David Bailey. I don't think he would be here, but at 11, 13, something like that, I'd be willing to take David Bailey. And that would basically be it. So it would be 3 edges sometime in the first, say, 13 picks. That'd be Arvell Reese, that would be Ruben Bain, and that would be David Bailey. This is in no particular order, so please don't, yell at me when you're like, how could you have, I don't know, Carnell Tate as your 9th ranked player, because I don't have him as my 9th ranked player. This is just players who I'd be willing to take. There's no offensive linemen in here. There are no tight ends in here. There are no interior defensive linemen. All for different reasons. Offensive lineman and tight end, it's not a need for Washington. Interior defensive lineman, there's not a player that is worth it. Obviously, quarterback, there won't be a quarterback that is worth it, and it's not a need for Washington. So, none of the above. So, as I said, if Washington trades back to round 13, there would be 3 edges who I'd be willing to take. There would also be 3 receivers that I'd be willing to take. There'd be 1 running back, 1 linebacker, 2 safeties, 2 corners. And I think that's basically what it would be for Washington. We are lucky that even though we have a lot of holes on this team, that the majority of the high-quality players actually kind of fit those holes. So, maybe with the exception of receiver, but there are some high-quality corners. We just need every level of the defense, and maybe there aren't interior guys in this class, but it's not a need that Washington needs to fill in this year. It'll probably be a need that Washington will need to fill next year and beyond, but for now, it's okay. Washington would like to fill edge rusher. It's not a must, and I do think that Ruben Bain will probably be available at 7. We gotta hope that one of Styles or Downs falls, and I think overall this is what Washington should kind of be hoping for. I do think the hope is to probably trade back. Probably the dream is you trade back 2 spots with Kansas City and they trade up for a receiver, or maybe Love, and the Saints go and take one of the corners and you take the other corner, or Downs is still there at 9. Whatever, I think there are really good scenarios for Washington to have. I think at 7, Washington will have the ability to pick a really, really high quality player. I am extremely excited for it. Now, another question is, let's say Washington takes Caleb Downs, and he becomes a top 3 safety. He's basically Budda Baker, maybe a little bit more juiced up Budda Baker, or Antoine Winfield plus. And let's say Ruben Bain was still on the field, and he turns into, like, Jared Verse plus, right? So, like, a borderline top 10 edge. Now, a top 10 edge versus a top 3 safety, top 10 edge is going to be more worth it, but I wouldn't call that a miss if I was Washington. So, are you going to be able to hit on a player and get a player who's going to be very impactful for you? I think defense is important. I think we need a high-impact player on our defense specifically. We don't have any stars on defense. Now, you can hope that maybe Leo Chanel turns into that, maybe Nick Cross can develop, maybe Trey Amos has a really good second year. But on the offensive side, Jane Daniels is a bona fide star. Terry McLaurin is a bona fide star, and let's be honest, Laramie Tunsil is a top 3 player at his position. So I think we have a lot of more star power on the offensive side. It's not as flashy. For all those fantasy football fans, you want to see the big yardage totals and the high scoring games. I don't want that. I want wins. So I think defense is how we do that. We don't have any superstars on the defensive side. I think in this draft class, whether it's Caleb Downs or Sonny Styles, I think Arvil Reese could be it. Ruben Bain, if we trade back maybe Mansour Delan or Jermon McCoy. I think there are players here who can be stars and can come in and be the most talented player on our defense day one. I do not think that would be necessarily hard to do with our defense, but I think that is a much more important hole for Washington to fill. Now, I understand the receiver angst, and I agree with it. Washington should address receiver sometime in the draft. I just don't think it needs to be at pick number 7. I think you could probably get really high-end receivers at pick 71, whether that is Ted Hurst, who I absolutely love, or Skylar Bell, or maybe Chris Bell falls because of the injury. Or let's say Washington trades back into the early teens and we get Dylan Thieneman, and then we have a 60-ish overall pick, and now we can draft a receiver with the 60-something overall pick, or a 50-something overall pick, a pick in the second round. I think that is very doable. And I did a show earlier about who should Washington target between rounds 2 and 7, who are kind of later round guys. Some of them you heard of because some of it'll be top 100 players. Some of these are players who are a little bit more buried in draft boards. And it was basically, I covered all positions, but I dove especially deep into receivers. I think there were 12 different receivers that Washington can target between round 2 and 7. There was 4 guys on basically each day of the draft. There was 4 guys for rounds 6 and 7. There were 4 guys for rounds 4 and 5, and then 4 guys for rounds 2 and 3. So I think there was enough depth in this year's class that you do not need to force a pick, and in my opinion, a reach for Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson or Makai Lemon or whoever at number 7. Now, if you get to more of the teens area, I think the player value and the prospect actually fits in with that better. So if there's no corners available, no edge rushers available, I could see the argument for that, and I wouldn't mind it, just not at 7. Jeremiah Love, I would accept it. I think he's going to be top for sure 5 at his position once he comes into the league. Maybe he'll be able to be a Bijan and arguably number 1 or a top 2. I wouldn't be surprised at all. We have the offensive line to be able to support him to become a very impactful player even when he first steps into the league in his rookie season. So I think that is all very important, and I think it's all very relevant information, which is why I wouldn't be crying if we got Jeremiah Love. Now, some tears might be shed if we get Carnell Tate at 7, I'm not going to lie. But I have faith in Adam Peters that we will do what is best for the team. And what is most important is that us as fans, that we support the players who get selected. I don't care if we draft Diego Pavia with the 7th overall pick. I'm going to support him, and I'm going to root for him, and I'm going to want him to do well. And I just want to take a second for us all to kind of have some perspective. In Israel, and 2 days is Memorial Day, where we think about all of the people who sacrificed their lives and continue to. Every day in this war, there's more casualties. Who sacrificed their lives so then, I can just be doing this and talking football and talking about my passion, and how lucky am I to do that, and how lucky are all of us. Whatever country you live in, people have sacrificed so much, whether that's their lives, or their time, or their money, or their effort, into making your life better. And I think it's really important that we just take a second and be thankful of that. Doesn't matter what your politics are, who you like, who you don't like. Everyone here has been the benefactor of someone doing something selfless. So let's try and be positive. Sometimes before the draft, people get really angsty because they have their couple players who they want the team to take, and if they don't have that, they'll be really sad, or we have to trade down no matter what. And let's just all take it with a grain of salt. Let's all be happy. This is a great time of year. And I'll see you guys on Thursday for my predictive mock draft. And then it's draft week. Like, it's actually draft week 5 days from the draft. This is just the best. All right, I'll see you next time on The Fan's Perspective.